Okay, welcome to another episode of the Pierce Brothers. I'm with Dad here today. We're going to be doing a discussion video of the reasons why 40 Smith & Wesson is better than 10 millimeter. So in this video, we're just going to list the advantages that how we see it, that 40 is better than the 10 millimeter. So with that being said, we will do a separate video talking about 10 millimeter and its advantages over 40 Smith & Wesson. So be sure to stay tuned for that video.
You might want to watch this one first and then watch that one as a two. We don't want to make this one too long.
Yeah. So anyways, I guess we'll go and get started.
Okay. To help understand more the history of the 40, of course, back in the late 60s, experimenters, Jeff Cooper actually was involved in that. They took 30 Remington cases of all things, which is its own case, and they cut them down. They started fitting them in custom Browning high powers to create a 40 caliber pistol cartridge. It was in different case lengths as they experimented with that. They used 3840 Winchester bullets, and they used 401 Herter's Power Mag bullets. Kind of an interesting blend, but it was, of course, a 400-inch bullet, or 10 millimeter as we call it. Eventually, that cartridge saw the light of day in the 10 millimeter. Norma was the one that actually introduced the load officially with a CIP standard, and that was in 1983, if I remember correctly. And the original loads, I still remember, they came in 20-round boxes, and they were running in U.S. terms about 37,500 psi, which is SAMI pressure limits today on that cartridge. And it was pushing a 200 grain jacketed bullet at 1,200 feet per second. Pretty potent load. So the Bren 10 was the first pistol that came out, and it was not a good gun. They had magazine shortages. They couldn't supply magazines. They had reliability issues. They weren't ergonomically good. It just kind of like 5 different engineers designed the gun is kind of how it impressed you. But anyway, they weren't any good. I've shot and owned them, and they pass on that. Well, let's fast forward just a few years, and there was a big shootout in Florida with the FBI and some truly bad guys in the FBI. It was a bad day for the FBI. Just a lot of blood spilt, and very famous shootout. And they were using 38 snubbies and other things. But at any rate, they realized they needed more power, and ultimately they led to them to adopt the 10mm, and they did it specifically in this big Smith & Wesson double-action revolver. Meanwhile, Smith & Wesson had introduced that, and it didn't take long until the agents realized that that thing's kicking pretty stout. A lot of time between shots. Follow-up time was not as fast as they'd like to see it. But incidentally, the FBI did a lot of testing on it, and they found that 10mm a very divisive cartridge. But again, they had a lot of agents that were not seasoned, hardened to recoil shooters, and they decided, and actually they came out with what's commonly known as the FBI Light, or the 10mm Auto Light, and it basically took a 180 grain, jacketed hollow point bullet. There were different loads and so on, and dropped it down between 980 and 1,030 feet per second. They wanted to stay subsonic, but they wanted to reduce recoil. So, everything was fine. And then one day Smith & Wesson woke up when all this was going on, and they said, hey, wait a minute. We can cut the case down, shorten the case, change it from a large primer pocket to a small one, and we can drop the pressure down to 35,000, and we can still duplicate those loads. But here's the significant advantage: we can fit that cartridge in smaller, lighter guns. This being a Glock, but Smith & Wesson, of course, came out with a whole series of 40 Smith & Wesson caliber guns. That was in 1990, and man, the 40 took off like gangbusters. I mean, it was the hottest selling gun. Everybody was buying 40s left and right. Law enforcement flocked to it in just a huge way. And so it became the law enforcement cartridge. But a lot of people used it. I mean, I knew people shooting deer with them, and they all worked well. But again, there was a few points to make on it. One was that you could get it in lighter, smaller guns like this Glock 27. With even a flush magazine, it holds 10 rounds, but you can also put in a longer mag, it will accept that and get, 15 rounds, whatever. But it's still a very potent round. It would, again, it would duplicate the FBI light load, but it would also exceed it. So it's pretty easy to run 1,050, even up to 1,100 with a 180 grain bullet in a 40. It also can drop down in weight to like a 165 or 150, 155, even 135s, and get that velocity up to 150s and to 155 grainers. You'll real easily do 1250, and then if you really know what you're doing with hand loading, you can hit 1,300 feet per second with those. But it's actually a very good round. Now, there's other advantages too in that.
One is ammo cost. So if you're not a reloader and you're just buying ammo, you can buy a whole lot more 40 Smith & Wesson than you could 10 millimeter ammo. So that's a big advantage in itself.
It is. A friend of mine that runs a gun shop, he said, Brian, it's just as simple. It's economics with the 9mm, the 40, and the 45. I can go buy 500 rounds of 9mm, or I can buy 375 rounds of 40, or I can buy 300 rounds of 45. He said, which one am I going to buy? And it is economics, but it is notably less costly than a 10mm. So that's yet another advantage. Another thing is, of course, the 10mm in full power loads. You don't hear much about 10mm light loads anymore. But with full power 40, or comparing 40 to 10mm with full power loads, the 40 is a lot faster recovery time between shots. People that aren't maybe a little more recoil sensitive will handle the 40 better. It's still a very effective round. So,
another one would be magazine capacity. For the most part, most 40 Smith & Wessons will have a superior magazine capacity to a comparable 10 millimeter. Now, there are some exceptions. Say the Glock 22 and the Glock 20, 40 Smith & Wesson and 10 millimeter, they both hold 15 rounds. But with the Glock, again, the gun size is a lot bigger. It's just a big, bulky chunk of plastic, I guess, is what you'd call it. So,
well, and the 10mm's that they've made more compact now are a lot longer here because of the greater length of the cartridge, whereas the 40s are shorter there. So it does give you a little bit better ergonomic grip, or smaller grip to fit more shooters. I've got to say something else too. The ballistician comes out in me sometimes, and a friend of mine, Mike Venturino, a famous gun writer who passed away here last year, he had a Kimber 40, and Kimber made full-size 1911s and 40. They couldn't get them to sell because everybody wanted the 10mm or the 45. But Mike bought one. He'd put it in ransom machine rests and shoot cast bullets and so on. He said, Brian, that thing is incredible. It'll shoot like this, ragged holes at 25 yards. And again, the ballistician in me, and developing literally hundreds of different loads for the 40, you almost have to work at it to find a load or a powder charge that won't produce single-digit extreme spreads in it. So, in the right flop, striker fired pistols, forget getting really, really good accuracy in those. Typically, they just don't offer it. But if you have a custom 1911 or something, boy, that gun, those 40s are super accurate. They really are. So, or have the potential to be, I should say. So, lower cost of ammo, lower recoil, still very effective. Versatility in bullet weights. One other thing, with Glock pistols, you can convert the caliber. So let's say you got a 40 Smith & Wesson Glock, you can buy a 357 SIG barrel and do caliber conversions. I would say that's an advantage. It is. So, and those 357 SIG barrels are readily available, and they just drop right in. So it gives you some versatility with a 40 over the 10.
I think that pretty much covers it all.
So we don't want to make it too long, but that's kind of an upshot. The 40 has been waning in popularity with law enforcement and other circles, just common people. But it's really a better round than most people realize. I'm quite fond of the 40, actually. So it's actually a very good round. And there's tons of them on the used market, and they're still offered new. Smith & Wesson still offers them. Glock still offers them. A lot of variations, a lot of complexes, and a lot of those are very, very cost-effective guns. In other words, they're very low-cost guns, but they there's a ton of them on the used market, and you can usually get smoking good deals on them. But it's a very good cartridge. So
it's very similar ballistically to the 3840 from the old West days. So, and that had a reputation for being a fairly good stopping cartridge. I don't like to use that word, but Yeah.
defense.
Yeah.
Effective defense.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that covers it. So, thanks for watching this episode, and be sure to check out our the 10 millimeter versus 40 Smith and Wesson, and why the 10 millimeter its advantages. So,
Stay tuned.
See you guys next time.
Thank you.